On to the AFC South predictions. That's the next part of this show. Some call it one of the weaker divisions of football. It probably is one of the weaker ones in football, probably the weakest in football. But we're starting off with the best team in the AFC last year, record-wise at least, the Tennessee Titans. 12-5 last season, lost in the divisional round versus the Cincinnati Bengals, who went on to compete versus the Rams in the Super Bowl. Do you feel like the Titans are being overlooked and underrated coming into this season? I'll start with you, Drew.
Ooh, I feel like
You faked me out there.
Yeah, no,
It's a no look.
I'll say this. I think overlooked and underrated. I don't want to use those terms. I feel like disrespected is the word that I feel like is appropriate. But I feel like overlooked, no, because then you look at their schedule and then you understand why there's a chance that they might not finish up top of the division, because this schedule, like, I went into it with an open mind. Yes, they're being overlooked. You know, they had a significantly worse roster last season. Significantly worse is strong. But they went through a bunch of injuries. Derrick Henry was out. A.J. Brown, Julio Jones, like I mentioned earlier in the show, in and out of the lineup. One of the worst offensive lines in the league. Ryan Tannehill was able, on top of the defense, most importantly the defense, specifically that defensive line of theirs. And, of course, Byard, you have to give him that respect. However, they still were able to win games and finish up top of the AFC conference. Number 1 seed, get that bye. They were underwhelming come playoff time for sure. One of the weaker 1 seeds we've seen. However, you still have to give them that respect with the amount of adversity they faced and the ability to overcome that. You still have to give them that credit. However, I look at the schedule and I do get worried, especially for the fact that, one, their offensive line is still bad, did not improve much, and 2, their secondary, you're counting on Caleb Farley to come back, and he was injured a majority of last season. And outside of him, and Byard, of course, who is one of the best safeties in the league, if not the best safety in the league, outside of Byard, there's not much depth here on the secondary. So I do have my worries when it comes to those two regards. And lastly, it's Ryan Tannehill. Ryan Tannehill was a huge part of the reason why the Titans were able to be the number 1 seed in the AFC, because he was so great at managing these games in the regular season. However, when it came down to playoff time where he needed to play up to par, he wasn't able to do so and ended up costing his team the game. Now, in terms of their record prediction, it was really tough for me because I wanted to have them in a position where they were at minimum fighting for that last wild card spot, or even still potentially fighting for the top spot in their division. But just going through the schedule, I didn't see how it was possible. I'll go through week by week so you guys can see what I'm talking about in terms of difficulty. So week 1, I have versus the Giants. I have the W there. At Buffalo, a loss. Las Vegas in Tennessee, I have a loss. At Indianapolis, I have a loss. At Washington, I have a W here, and then they enter their bye week. Versus Indianapolis, I gave them the W. I do believe that they split. At Houston, W. At KC, I have a loss. Versus Denver, I have a loss. At Green Bay, I have a loss. Versus Cincinnati, I actually went back to my Cincinnati predictions. I actually gave Cincinnati a loss here, given the fact that they had a very intense matchup in the playoffs, and it came down to one play, really, and Cincinnati ended up stealing a game there, and I think that Tennessee's going to be hungry, looking forward to this game mostly over the rest of these games this season, and I do have Tennessee winning here. At Philadelphia, I have Tennessee winning. Versus Jacksonville, I have Tennessee winning. At LA Chargers, I have them losing. Versus Houston, I have them winning. Versus Dallas, I have them winning. And at Jacksonville, Week 18, I have them losing, coming to a record of 9-8.
That seems fair. So you think they sweep Houston?
I do think so. Houston, I'm not super high on, obviously, for obvious reasons. It is in division. Of course, that's always the chance that they could lose. However, I feel like Tennessee is more than capable of beating them.
Yeah, I agree. The question I have with the Titans this year, what version of Ryan Tannehill are we getting?
100%.
Right, that's number 1, because in 2021 he had more interceptions than 2020 and 2019 combined. Right, he did play decent at least definitely not to his part in the regular season and the postseason as well. So what type of Ryan Tannehill are we going to get, and what does this offense look like with no A.J. Brown? Right, you guys know Treylan Brooks is my favorite wide receiver, but he's not coming in and replacing A.J. Brown 100%. Their other wide receiver being Robert Woods, 30 years old, coming off a torn ACL. So this offense is going to look, at least passing-wise, a lot different than it has in years past.
He can't even get through a practice.
He has asthma. He'll be fine.
Treylan Brooks. Well, so far he can't get through a practice.
He has asthma, bro. He'll be fine.
Asthma's not something to joke about, bro.
He'll be fine.
All right, as first
I'm
responder, Drew, I'm letting you know that
facts.
asthma is serious.
I'm just giving you the fact that he has been unable to
the
finish
first day of
practice.
practice, he didn't finish practice. Day 2, he came and played and did full practice.
I'm
so
not.
that's not
I'm
true.
not saying that it's a problem. I'm just saying he's been unable to participate in a lot of practices.
He finished day 2
finish
of
the
minicamp. He played the entire practice, participated in the entire practice.
Oh,
Day
so-
1, he struggled because of asthma.
He's AJ Brown light.
He'll be fine.
Well, I trust you because you're the one that probably has Treylan Brooks as your lock screen.
I don't. It's actually it's Justin Jefferson and AJ Brown and Jamar Chase.
Okay.
But moving on.
Taste.
Man of taste, of course. And my home screen one is Mekhi Becton.
Oh, that's ugly.
It's kind of nuts. I know. I just need a Jets one in there.
Listen, Mekhi's, if he's healthy,
He could be that guy.
the big ticket. You don't get that nickname
Big
for
ticket,
nothing.
for sure. Moving on to Derrick Henry though.
That's because he lets everybody pass him by.
He was great his
The
rookie year.
big
What are we
ticket.
doing?
That's actually not a good nickname for an offensive lineman.
I actually love the nickname,
If
especially because of that
if you're an
chain that he
offensive
has.
lineman and your nickname is called the big ticket, that's because you let everybody get entry.
Bro, have you seen his chain?
His chin.
His chain.
Yeah, I have seen his chin.
Bro, that
He's
chain
tough.
is one of the iciest chains I've ever seen in my
He's
life.
super tough. All right, moving on to Derrick Henry for the third time now.
Crime.
I think Derrick Henry will probably be fine, but I can't sit here and ignore that age 28 is typically the age apex for running backs. This is when we see a pretty steep decline in the history of the NFL. This is where we see the steep decline for running backs, and I don't think it's a coincidence that his first major injury came last season in his age 27 season, and he also struggled right before injury when he came back. That playoff game, maybe not 100%, wasn't phenomenal either. I think Derrick Henry will be okay, but just keep an eye out because that age 28 season historically is when running backs decline. You mentioned about the offensive line being questionable. Defensively, I think they'll be fine. They were 6th in points, 3rd in rush defense. It is struggle against the pass, but this year they're getting J.C. Horn back. They extended Harold Landry. So I think they should be fine defensively. But I just look at the rest of the AFC, and which we've talked about time and time again, how great it is at quarterback, at offense, just teams in general. There's 8 teams in the AFC that wouldn't shock me if any of them went to the Super Bowl. I don't see Tennessee in that conversation. I have them at 8 and 9. Right on the borderline of, possibly being on that wild card spot, but 8 and 9, you're probably 2 games out. You're probably 2 games out at this point. It sucks because I think Vrabel's a great coach, and honestly, if it wasn't for Vrabel, they might be 7 and 10. If you really look at the schedule, their out of division opponents are really difficult. You mentioned a few of them being KC, the Chargers, Dallas, Philly. Like they have a few really tough opponents. So I have them going 8 and 9, probably missing the division, probably missing the playoffs.
I think they are being overlooked and underrated. I like the Tennessee Titans.
I'm shocked to hear this. This is the first time you're saying this all of season.
Yeah, I mean, I know I like the Colts a lot. They're still the favorites for me to win this division, but I just can't help but look at what the Titans have been over the past couple of years, who Mike Vrabel is as a coach, and Ryan Tannehill is a good quarterback. I know he had a down season last year, but I can't blame the guy much when the offensive line was one of the worst in the NFL. That's why it's hard. It's just they have the 16th ranked offensive line, but that's because their run blocking efficiency is really good, and then their pass blocking efficiency is just one of the worst in the NFL. And you can't ask a quarterback to succeed in those type of conditions, especially when your receivers are inconsistent and Julio Jones, A.J. Brown being unhealthy, no option at tight end. There was no receivers for Ryan Tannehill all season. Austin Hooper, to me, is not somebody who really, moves the needle for me. I'm not that confident in him. Mike Vrabel has never had a losing season. 9-7, 9-7, 11-5, 12-5. He's gotten better every year, and this is the same coach that last year dealt with the most players that were out due to injury and just an influx of key players out all year, and they still finished with the 15th ranked offense, 6th ranked defense. They beat the Bills, Chiefs, Rams, Niners, swept the Colts. Like, to me, it's just Mike Vrabel and the Titans have done too much. They have proved too much to me for me to just say they're going to fall down and give up and just be this team that is not that good. The defense is going to be better this year. Jeffrey Simmons is still there. Danico Autry, Harold Landry, Bud Dupree, now having a full year recovering from his ACL. Their linebacking core, I think, got better. They replaced Rashad Evans, and Jayon Brown with David Long, who was better than both of them last year, and Zach Cunningham, who was a former Pro Bowler with the Texans, who now is in the scheme for a year now. Caleb Farley, very high on him as a prospect. Season was cut short last year due to injury. Christian Fulton is a star in the making. Christian Fulton is one of those guys that people aren't talking about enough, but last season, 13 games, 2 interceptions, 14 passes defended, allowed a 51.4 completion percentage, the best of any corner in the NFL, and a 71.3 passer rating. And his 16.7% incompletion rate is one of the best in the NFL, top 25 coverage grade. In 2020, he was in the slot as rookie, but in 2021, he was placed on the outside. That's where he's going to fit best. Christian Fulton, to me, is a star. And outside of the Buffalo Bills, I think they have arguably the best safety duo in the NFL. With Kevin Byard and Amani Hooker, they're flat out awesome. And Elijah Molden in the slot. Like, there's a lot to be excited about with this defense. This defense is going to be elite. And the offensive line, that's just really where I worry about the most. And the weapons group, of course, because you're relying on Treylan Brooks, who knows what he's going to be. Like, listen, he disappointed at the combine. Watching his film,
he had a 90% speed score. It was higher than Garrett Wilson's.
Listen, I don't want your input on my
okay.
Treylan Brooks, even on the film, I didn't think he was a top 3 receiver in the draft to me on film. Austin Hooper, he's average. Like, he's the definition of just a mediocre tight end. He can block and stuff, but average. He's just average. Robert Woods coming off a torn ACL. That's worrisome as well.
Oh, my guy's all right, man.
It's just the weapons group. It's one of the worst in the league. You're relying on a rookie to really take you over the top in Treylan Brooks. The offensive line, they lost Roger Saffold, who was one of the better run blockers, but in pass pro, he struggles tremendously. And you're relying on guys like Brewer and Radens to now step up and get starting roles and all of a sudden be better. You know, maybe that makes a difference. But to me, it's just, listen, I think the Titans are going to be good. Do I think they're going to be great? I don't think they're going to be great. I think the defense is going to be one of the better ones in the league, and Jim Schwartz is a defensive assistant on that staff. He's somebody who's routinely had great defenses throughout his coaching career. And you look at the schedule, there's very few gimmies. They have such a tough schedule: Buffalo, Las Vegas, Indy twice, Kansas City, Green Bay, Cincinnati, Philadelphia, the Chargers, Dallas. When you went over the schedule, Drew, you gave them the win week 17 and the loss week 18. I'm more likely thinking they're losing to Dallas and winning against Jacksonville and maybe sweeping them more so than they're going to beat Dallas, because I think Dallas is still a formidable opponent. I have them finishing 9-8. I think that's a reasonable place for them to finish. If the offensive line can figure it out and they're better from last year, if Derrick Henry doesn't get hurt, if Robert Woods is all of a sudden the same guy he was before, and Treylan Brooks is the best rookie receiver, and Austin Hooper has a resurgence, and Ryan Tannehill now goes back to the 2020 form, like, there's a lot of things that factor into them overachieving. Then I can see them as one of the better teams in the AFC again, like they have been the past couple of years. But as currently stands, there are just way too many question marks offensively that hold me back from saying they're gonna win this division.
Do you have them beating Jacksonville both games?
I think there's a chance they sweep the Texans and Jacksonville.
I have them sweeping Jacksonville. I have them splitting with Houston. I also went back. I think they beat Dallas. I have them at 9-8. Not to just piggyback on you guys, but 9-8, 8-9 sounds about right.
Yeah. Because week 18 is at Jacksonville, which is why I have them as a loss, and then against Dallas. Dallas is one of those teams that's hard to project as well, because you obviously have to be high on Dak Prescott. You have to be high on CeeDee Lamb, Dalton Schultz, their offensive line, Ezekiel Elliott, and Tony Pollard. Of course, can't forget about him when you're in the presence of Joel V. Moran.
And Dak splits with Amari versus not Amari. There's a big difference.
No, for sure. And I do have my worries about that.
But he did not have CeeDee Lamb.
And I do have my worries about that secondary as well. You give the credit to Diggs 100%. He just had one of the most insane efficiencies in terms of intercepting the football, but giving up yards over the top, it was ridiculous. Of course, you have Micah Parsons, who's one of the best defensive players in the league, but overall, I'm still not overly impressed with that defense. And offensively, we're going to see what Dak Prescott is made of when he doesn't have a plethora of weapons on the outside to really sling it. And listen, Vrabel is an amazing head coach. I would not be surprised if they get that W, especially at home.